Welcome to Living Free in Tennessee, where we talk about building the life you choose on your terms. Today is Monday, July 24th, 2023, and this is episode 771 of Living Free in Tennessee. We're back into our proper numbering, which is a good thing because we got a little cattywampish last week. Speaking of that, if you downloaded Friday's episode and about 20 minutes in, it just sort of ended out of nowhere, there was a file upload issue. Somebody let me know about that yesterday, and I have removed that 20-minute file and replaced it with the full 50-minute file. If you'd like to hear that whole episode, refresh your podcast feed and it will download the whole episode. If you have any trouble with that, let me know. So today I'm going to talk about curing meat on the homestead. No, I'm not. I'm going to talk about Homestead First Aid. We haven't talked about this topic in a while. I did talk about it with Jenny, our holler neighbor Jenny, a while ago, and I had something happen today that made me just think, it's time to talk about first aid again. And first aid on the homestead is pretty important. So just going to be talking about being ready for the things that happen there. Before we jump into that, though, I wanted to just talk about our featured event of today's show, which should be the Homestead First Aid course at Self-Reliance Festival. But I did my whole marketing plan for the week on the plane, and I wasn't planning to do this topic today. So our featured episode today is Girl Gun Weekend. I'm going to be taking Tactical Responses Fighting Pistol class, which is $600, and you need to bring 1,000 rounds of ammunition. They have guns you can rent, or you bring your own gun. So that's happening over Labor Day weekend, which is the first weekend of September. For some reason, I don't have the dates in my show notes. Anyway, that class is in Camden, Tennessee. And what I've done is I've rented an Airbnb, and I have sort of a plan for food. It's about $400 for multiple of us to share an Airbnb together. And that's for 3 nights. If everybody who decides to do Girl Gun Weekend with me decides to do 2 nights, I'll see if we can cancel the last night and get a little bit off of that cost. But it's going to be about $400 for food and lodging. The class itself is September 2nd and 3rd. That's Saturday, Sunday of Labor Day weekend. I will get there Friday afternoon. And then I plan to have the Airbnb through Sunday night. I may personally go home Sunday. It just depends on how wrecked I am. But I know that those of you flying out the next day may want to have one more night at the B&B in Camden. So I did rent it for 3 nights. If you want to go to that, the link is in the show notes of the audio podcast, and they are also in the description of this YouTube video. If you're watching this on YouTube, you need to let me know you're coming. I have had one RSVP right now, somebody who wants to take the class. I am not charging any money. I just want to assess how many people are taking it. If I don't hear from more than just this one person between now and about a week from now, I am going to shut the whole thing down. She and I are going to get a different lodging solution so that we can keep our costs to about $400. And I'm just going to go take the class with her. So I'll be going either way. But I wanted to do this as an opportunity for those of you who have been hesitant to do your gun training to come out, train with me. You'll be able to stay with a bunch of cool ladies who listen to Living Free in Tennessee. And yes, this is a gender-specific class. I mean, the class itself has mixed genders, but I am keeping it to women on this one just to keep it simple so there's not weird bedroom sharing things. Because we do have like bedrooms with 2 single beds in them, for example. Nobody shares a bed, but you may be in a room with somebody. And that just starts getting awkward when we start mixing the genders. Anyway, September 2nd and 3rd is the class. Get in the evening before September 1st. You can stay till Monday. That is at livingfreeintennessee.com if you want to look at the events calendar, or the link is in the show notes. And as I said, it is in the description of today's show. The other thing I want to do is thank our 2 sponsors of today's show. Sponsor number 1 is Strong Roots Resources, strongrootsresources.com. Carrie Brown specializes in small land permaculture design, and he has also added a really cool specialty in wild edible plant identification. So you can hire him to come out, help you link your goals to your permaculture plan for your homestead, or your urban lot or your suburban lot, and he can help execute those plans as well as go out and geolocate what wild edible plants you already have on your property, which is really cool to know going in, so you don't like take out a whole stand of elderberries when they're already there growing for you and you wanted elderberries. So I think it's really cool. He's been very supportive of the show for many years and was one of the first sponsors to jump on board. That's strongrootsresources.com to just check out all the consultations that he offers. Our second sponsor of today's show is freesteading.com. Freesteading.com is a free speech based and homesteading and prepper based community. You don't have to be into homesteading and preparing, but a lot of people there are. Anyway, freesteading.com came to be because Tag from Life Done Free and his crew up in Kansas had lots of people requesting like ways to communicate them without being on the Book of Faces, which was doing a lot of censoring. And so they created a platform where people can sell livestock to each other, talk about homesteading topics, and not get censored. That's all over at freesteading.com. If you do go there, be sure to connect with me through the Living Free in Tennessee group so that we can, talk to each other like on a social network. I also wanted one last thing to say. We're doing a Q&A show. And in order to do a Q&A show later this week, I need cues. That's right. Get your questions in, Nicole at livingfreeintennessee.com, or go to livingfreeintennessee.com and click on contact and fill that out. Get me any question you want about any topic. I'm just going to do a big old variety show later this week, and I wanted to get your questions, preferably in email, so that we can base it around the sorts of questions you have in mind right now. With that, it's time for our first segment of today's show. That's Tales from the Prepper Pantry, where we talk about storing what you eat and eating what you store. And this week I came home from being out of town at Jack Spirko's to a really great crop of green beans. I picked them yesterday. I should have canned them by now. I have not. It is late in the day Monday. I will can them before bed tonight because you don't want stuff like that sitting around. And usually I harvest them the night before and can them in the morning. But that was not to be, as you will hear later in this episode. Anyway, I've got about 8 jars ready to put up, which gets me closer to my goal of 60 jars, which is what we're working towards this time. And I don't really have the backstop of the farmer's market like I usually have where I can buy them. I did get a half a bushel that I was able to purchase this year from one source, but I just don't expect that I'm going to find more. So we have been planting green beans like mad. In fact, on Homestead Happenings on Friday, I will talk about what we're doing with that whole rotational planting and how we're keeping that going through the dog days of summer. The other thing that's going on from a pantry standpoint is when I'm out of town, I do pre-planned meals, and I had a venison roast out, but I had not put it all together and said, hey, this is how you cook it. So this recipe comes from Tactical. I got home, sous vide was running. There was a venison roast in the sous vide at 145, and it had been running for hours. It ended up going about 10 hours before we used it. And what he did is he put salt, thyme, oregano, rosemary, freeze-dried garlic into a vac-sealed bag and put that in the sous vide at 135, and then, which is how I usually do roasts, to have them sort of medium rare in the middle. He decided he wanted to make sure it got cooked in time for dinner, so he turned it up to 145 later in the day. And then I came home from being out of town, and I took over dinner. So I made side dishes of a garden saute and a cucumber salad. I made a video, if you haven't seen it, it's on YouTube, about just how to make homemade salad dressing because it's so easy to make. And once you make it, you don't really want to go back to store salad dressing, especially if you can source some really nice balsamic vinegars. That's one of the secrets, is those nice spices and nice balsamic vinegars. Anyway, had that all ready to go, and then I took the roast out of the sous vide, poured the juices into, because you end up with juices in the bag when you do that, poured the juices into a little container to spoon over the slices of roast, dried off the roast so it was nice and dry on the outside, took it outside to my Blackstone, and then I hooked it up, I just seared it really well. So it was a nice dark crust on the outside, and it was more like medium to medium well on the inside at 145. And it was delicious. Like the spices had really penetrated the roast, and then I spooned the sauce over the top. I did not thicken it with freeze-dried mushrooms, which I might have done had I felt like it, but I didn't feel like getting my blender dirty and having to clean it. Actually, that's why I didn't do that this time. But it was really nice, and it was nice to come home from being out of town to a really like pretty superior homemade meal. So that's what we did from the prepper pantry. So the venison came from the hills around here, and then of course the other things all come from the property except for the rosemary. Like even the spices were grown here on what we ate. I have a question in that I am going to fit in right now instead of at the end that said, what is the cooking device mentioned, please? Spelling: sous vide, SIOUSVIDE. And it's an immersion. It's sort of like an immersion heater. So you put food in a vacuum sealed bag, or you can buy silicone bags if you don't want to do it in plastic, or you can sort of use Ziplocs and slowly dunk it in water to get all the air out. But the point is that there is contact with the water that you're heating and whatever's in the bag that you're cooking. And then you can set a very precise temperature and cook for a long time to make things more tender. So you can take things that aren't typically super tender and make them tender and still maintain a medium rare cooking in meat, for example, just by running it in the sous vide for longer. So what it does is it heats the water to a precise temperature and then rotates the water. And it's a great way to cook steaks and hard-boiled eggs and soft-boiled eggs and a whole bunch of other stuff. Like once you get, like, you can make yogurt with it. It's a pretty cool tool. They cost about $150 though, I believe last time I looked. Sometimes they fall below $100 for the device. And then of course you want to be able to vacuum seal things, or as I said, you can get around it by using a Ziploc bag. And they have the silicone bags. I don't know how you use those because I've never used them, but I love that device for some of, like, this venison was not something I tenderized, and this particular one went straight into the freezer without resting, or I think it did rest, but it was not aged because it was the one from 2 years ago that I was not home to process. So it just got cut up into pieces and put in the freezer. And when you don't like age the venison, it ends up not as tender as it could be. Last year we aged it for 7 days and it was delicious. In fact, I think I'll do more venison steaks this week now that I've said it out loud, because I'm sort of eating off both these deer, like the one from 2 years ago, which I've been slow to use because it's in much bigger pieces, and then the one I did last year where I cut it up into steaks and ground it and did all the things that I usually do. The deal is hunting season happens during Nicole is speaking season, and if Nicole is speaking and a deer comes in, often that means that we will end up with a something that somebody else has cut up, basically. And I just heard a beep in my house as if something is open. So I don't know. Tactical says it's easier to clean than the crock pot. If you put a liner in your crock pot, Tactical, the crock pot's easier to clean. And you may not know it, but I have crock pot liners. I just always forget to use them. I just have them from events. And I was like, gosh, I could put one of those in and just cook dinner, and then you just boop. It's another little time-saving tips from Nicole Sauce on the Monday show. I am drying more chocolate mint from the hillside for winter tea. I have a lot of it. I've given a lot of it away, and it's one of my favorite teas to make. So I'm pretty stoked about it. And I started out with just one little plant that I spent $3 on last year, and it has taken over the world in a good way for me because I like chocolate mint. So that's happening as well. Redoing the prepper pantry right now. So I sort of have been on hold with the prepper pantry because I want custom shelves in there. Right now we're using those big wire racks on wheels, which are fine. And the issue is that we stopped the water from coming under the house from the hillside, which is great, but there are some rotten areas that need to be replaced in the roofing on that. And then we wanted to raise the roof to have taller shelves and redo the roof so the roof is better. Anyway, that has been on my agenda for months. And I just realized, like, I need to admit that's not happening this year. and that I need my pantry organization in that room to be more functional. So I'm starting on it. It'll take me 4 or 5 weeks with my travel schedule and my work schedule to just sort of audit and redo that whole room and deep clean it, because people have tromped in and out during events and all sorts of stuff. So that is like my big pantry project for August, is to just reset the prepper pantry, make it super easy to use my freeze dryer in there, because there's stuff stacked in front of it right now. And then also, I think we may be installing a window unit so I can use the freeze dryer when it's hot outside, because I've got stuff I want to freeze dry, and the freeze dryer doesn't do great above like 85 degrees. And it's like 95 degrees in there right now because of, just normal summer temperatures. Also wanted to give you guys an update on the kitchen remodel. A lot of people have been asking me how that's going, and the answer is it's not going. Where it is as follows. We have subfloor in and painted. We have a temporary island made that I was going to have Ken Esch come out and make a really nice one, because he's a good carpenter, and we have not managed to schedule that yet. I have a wood countertop that's stained and sealed for that instead of the quartz countertop I want long term. But my nice sink is in, the faucet works, the dishwasher is in, and it works. Long term, I plan to put a commercial under the counter dishwasher in there instead of the dishwasher I have now. But you use what you have. And I've just been keeping my eye out for an under-the-counter commercial dishwasher that I will eventually find and put in there. The cabinets we found that were all rotten are just gone. And so the lower counters are restaurant work tables, stainless steel. And then I have stuff like stacked up in them. I might make curtains for those. Eventually, I will have custom cabinets made, but I don't want to go into debt on this project. And I think it's going to be $3,000 to $5,000 for me to pay to have custom cabinets, and then the milled wood countertops for those areas that I was going to buy from Jason Smith. I think it's going to be about that much total. So it's not like an insurmountable amount of money, but it's not money that I have in my pocket for that project right now. And then there are a couple of electrical wiring things we can do that need to be done. And the upper cabinets are golden. And then we have drywall to finish. So we were in the way of, I needed to order something for the drywall. That is on order. It arrives next week. And then my last thing before this phase is done is to get a new kitchen hood. Because right now there's not a hood over my stove. And I want a hood over my stove because when I cook, it would be nice to have that exhaust. So that's going to be probably a 2 week. I mean, it's something you could quote unquote do in a day, but then it's my house, so it'll take more than a day, and then we'll get interrupted in the middle of it. So I'm budgeting about 2 weeks for that project once I get the hood in. But I'm not even bothering putting the hood in until drywall is done and the paint is done and the backsplash is done, and then I can put the hood in. And I will just hang. I have a piece of stainless steel for my backsplash that goes behind the stove. That just has to be basically glued up there. So that's the update on the kitchen. Next segment is our live stream schedule for this week. If you want to make sure you're on the YouTube live streams and know what they are, Tuesday, that's tomorrow at 12:30 Central. I do my Tuesday live with John Willis from Special Operations Equipment, which is the shirt I am wearing right now. It says, "Expect to self-rescue. No one is coming to save you." That's my theme of today. And we will be talking to Toolman Tim Cook about building your empire. So check that out tomorrow right here on this YouTube channel or at Special Operations Equipment. I'll probably stream it to Self-Reliance Festival's website as well. Thursday, we have a 7 p.m. live for Self-Reliance Festival. I'm not sure what we're going to be talking about. I am talking to somebody on the side about what I want to be talking about. We'll see. And then, of course, I've got Friday Homestead Happenings. I'm going to be recording it at 8 a.m. because I need to leave the house by about 9 a.m. to make a 12 o'clock appointment across the state, 3 hours from where I live. And that means that Homestead Happenings from an audio podcast standpoint, will probably not be uploaded until after I make that drive. So it'll be Friday evening that you see that come through on your audio podcast feed. That's the live stream schedule for the week. Next up, we have the weekly shopping report from Joe. Yeah, we all love Toolman Tim. So this week he said our trip was a little abbreviated because we're not needing a bunch of stuff here. We skipped Home Depot, and when I checked online, I wasn't exactly sure which product was the one I've been comparing week over week. So it's either $3.67 for a 2x4x8, or it may have dropped to $2.98 per 2x4. I'll go inside next time. The first stop that we had, as usual, was Dollar Tree, and there were no big changes evident. The shelves all looked pretty well stocked. Aldi was next and last. We found everything we wanted, which for some reason was a short list, perhaps because the garden is producing. That's right. Eat off your garden, buy fewer groceries. Some staple prices at Aldi are: eggs are $1.12 a dozen, milk is $2.92 a gallon, heavy cream is $4.69, butter is $3.19, bacon is $3.99, flour is $2.19, and sugar jumped to $3.09. We are hearing of shortages, and I expected to see the 70% chocolate I like to go up, but it's still $1.99. I don't think it has ever changed that I remember. OJ is $3.19. That at least, that's for a quart, but I need to recheck to be sure. It was a large glass bottle. Untainted regular gasoline is $3.89 a gallon. Next up, we have the frugality tip, and there is not one. You know why there is not one? Because y'all haven't sent one in. So we crowdsourced the frugality tips, and if nobody sends me an email with frugality tip in the subject line to nicole@livingfreeintennessee.com, then we do not get the frugality tip. I see Justin from 30 Day Reviews is in here giving us links. So he's linking to all of the stuff that I've been talking about. Anyway, thanks for that, Justin. Finally, we have Operation Independence. This is where I talk about building local ongoing revenue into our lives, or doing something for yourself that makes it so you don't have to earn your money plus the tax you pay on your money to pay the person to do the thing that you could do. And this one, I mentioned at the beginning of the show that I'm going to can about 8 jars of green beans. So it's about 8 quarts of green beans. A quart is 16 ounces. That's a 16-ounce jar. That's the bigger jar. And a quart is not 16 ounces. It is 32 ounces. It's the bigger can. So there's like the 8-ounce, the 16-ounce can, and the 32-ounce can. And now those cans have like, they've made them slightly smaller, but you guys know what I mean. Anyway, so 8 of those are being canned basically for free here. Now, what isn't free is the energy and the lids. But because I was able to grow the green beans from seeds I got for free, by the way, I will have these jars of green beans this winter, and I don't have to go to the store and buy them. And that may seem like a really small thing, but when we talk about your homestead working for you rather than you working for your homestead, A, I have way more nutritious food because I'm getting it like straight out of the garden and processing it as fast as I can. And B, that's an example of a small thing that just sort of fits into my life, into my habits, and into my priorities that may. And I think we cut out. I hope that y'all got what I said. I am going to check and make sure. Yep, I'm on the right internet connection. I don't know why that happened. So sorry if I disappeared. At what point do you admit defeat and use chemicals in the garden that's not your permanent garden, a homestead, or right outside your door? It depends on what you mean by chemicals, Justin. I think that when you're learning how to grow, you're better served if you're going to use Seven Dust or Miracle Grow soil or whatever. It's not the end of the world. It's not something you can recover from. If you're going to start using preen, I'm going to be questioning your life choices. I can tell you this, that using a more natural solution for pests this year in the form of wood vinegar has meant that I don't need to. I would not use weed killer. So yeah, I don't use weed killer around anything I eat because my allergy problems that I talk about, I'm pretty sure come from glyphosate, and that's what weed killer is. I look at other ways to kill weeds, like by burning them or stomping them out or that sort of thing. But yeah, I would not. Mm-mm. So for me, that line is I'm not using weed killer anywhere near my food, anywhere, not ever. The only time I've ever thought about it that I might do it would be specifically targeted on Bermuda grass, like the specific plant, or on a poison ivy vine or something like that. I have takeover of brambleweed that's worse to get rid of than comfrey. So I'm in Tennessee and my weed problems are way worse than yours, but I understand the bramble problem. Until you get the bramble problem under control, I wouldn't try to plant food there. I would start by taking a year to clear that area of the brambles and keep them away. And it takes time. That's what I would do. Or I would build raised beds. But yeah, I'm not a huge glyphosate fan, and I mean, they say it doesn't stay persistent in the soil, but I don't necessarily believe that. Anyway, with that, it's time for the main topic of today's show, and that is first aid on the homestead. We haven't talked about this in a long time, and when we have, we've been talking about illness. So it's really important to think about your first aid skills if you are a homesteader, if you're an aspiring homesteader. I think in general, this is a topic that's a good idea to know about, but it's more important when you're exposing yourself to situations where you could be hurt, right? And being on a homestead, you end up exposing yourself to situations where you can be hurt. And the hospital is often further away than if you lived in the city, unless you have a homestead in your city lot, which means that when things go wrong on the homestead, they go wrong quickly. And then it becomes your responsibility to handle it because you are the only person to handle it. So a couple of things about that is if you know you're going to undertake something that's kind of dangerous, like climbing a tall ladder or working with pigs with sharp tusks or, anything of that nature, like a cow can lean on you, just lean on you and squish you between it and the gate, and that's going to hurt. And that could really hurt you a lot. Had to sneeze. So what would you do if that happened and you're by yourself? It's a little harder to deal with than if you have somebody else there to help you. Now, that being said, things happen when you're alone, and there are things that you can do, right? But if you haven't thought about first aid at all, if you can't handle the sight of blood, if you like all of those things, you need to address it, because when you're on your homestead, things are going to go wrong. They're going to go wrong with your livestock. They're going to go wrong with people there. Chuck says, "How is the patient?" Fine. There's a reason we're doing this topic today. And I mean, that's why when Chuck, who is in the chat of the live stream, offered to do a Homestead Advanced Work wound care class at Self-Reliance Festival, I thought, that's really cool, because most people focus on stopping the bleed, which is the immediate thing you need to do, right? First, you keep the person alive, but then you got to keep the person alive. And there's a lot that can happen once somebody is wounded, especially as regards getting infections and that sort of thing, after you stop the bleed, that you need to watch out for and take care of if you are the primary caregiver in a situation where somebody has been hurt. So I guess my question today is, have you thought about first aid? Because, what do you do if you get a burn? What do you do if there's a bee sting and somebody goes anaphylactic? What do you do if somebody drops a fence post driver on their head? What do you do if the tusk of a pig cuts your artery in your leg? What do you do if a rabbit scratches you and cuts your artery on your arm? What do you do if you have poison ivy over 75% of your body? What do you do? The answer is, when you can, you go to the hospital or to urgent care and you deal with it. But sometimes that's not an option. And Chuck's like, take training, and I may know a guy who has kits and builds custom kits to your needs. So today we had a little test, and I got a Zello message. So I'm roasting coffee, and I have so much coffee to roast, it's not even funny. And I've got a roast going in 2 roasters at one time. And I hear my phone, and I like my roasters are loud. I don't hear what's said on my phone. I hear tactical redneck voice from across the room on my phone, and it sounded urgent. And I'm sitting there roasting, and I'm like, he sounds kind of upset. So I wonder if the sheep got out again. And then I'm like, do I want to do this or not? Because I can't hear what he's saying. And often it's like he's really pissed off about the sheep getting out. And some little voice in my head said, well, just in case, go listen to that. And the message was, it probably had F's in it, but the core of the message was, I'm bleeding all over the place from a head wound. Come help. Well, there I am in the roasting shack. I have no idea where he is. So I said, where are you? He said, I'm by the fence charger. So I turned off my roasters so that nothing would burn down, because if you leave them on, things will burn down. I'm in Birkenstocks, so I'm like, well, head wound, bleeding all over the place means I need to bring something with me just in case, to make sure we can put pressure on that and stop the bleed. And I mean, obviously you're not going to put a tourniquet on somebody's neck, right? That would kill them. But I don't know how bad this is. I don't know if he's going to even be conscious when I get there. And I walk straight out the door, don't even close the door, grab a towel, which was the closest thing, and walk to the goat pasture. And there is no tactical by the fence charger. And I'm like, he is at the sheep pasture. I had also already queued up on Zello to my neighbor and said, I need help with a bleed that's bad in the goat pasture right now, because I didn't know how bad it was. So I instantly was like, more people, like a second person is going to be helpful if it's really bad. Worst case scenario, if it's not as bad, I just have an extra person there. So I walked back down the hill, went into the house and put actual shoes on, based on, because I was like, I'm not going to be able to manage this very effectively in Birkenstocks. Put shoes on, grabbed my keys, got into the car. Now my car has first aid kits all over the place, so that's a good thing. It's ready to go. Still had my towel, and started driving over to the sheep pasture. And while I'm driving, changed the location. And Steve's like, can I bring anything? I'm like, bring things that stop blood. That's all I know. And so I started heading over, and I see tactical riding on his 4-wheeler coming towards me with a completely red face full of blood, and his hand on his head holding it, right? So I stop the car when I get to him. I get out of the car with my handy towel, and I start walking towards him. He's like, just meet me at the house. And he kept going. And I was like, okay, well, I will just meet him at the house. And I turn the car around. I get back on Zello and tell Steve, okay, he's no longer at the sheep pasture. He's going to the house. I think I can handle this on my own. I will let you know if I need your help. So I go back home, and he's got, at that point, he's got paper towels on his head. I grabbed gauze and applied pressure. And by this time, it had clotted enough that it wasn't like head wounds. When they bleed, it's an amazing amount of blood that comes out of them for any little thing you do. And this was not a little thing. So he also has long hair, and I couldn't see anything. I could just feel where the wound was. And I felt around to see if there was another wound. And then I was like, listen, we're gonna have to shave your head. because I can't see anything. And because the bleeding had stopped, I wasn't feeling like we needed to rush to the hospital. So got inside, and we did the pressure. Like, the first thing we did was apply pressure to stop bleeding. And then I needed to clean it, and the hair was in the way of cleaning it. So I cut the hair away just from the area of the wound so I could see. And the thing that saved my butt right there is that I sew things sometimes. And like many women who sew, I have a pair of sewing scissors that only touch fabric. These scissors hide with my sewing machine in a room where you would have to go, and then you have to know where the secret pocket is in the case in which I put my sewing machine to get those scissors. So anybody raiding my scissors to use them for something like paper or, I don't know, cutting wire or whatever people do with scissors, it would have to be very intentional. And they know they would risk the wrath of Nicole for using her sewing scissors on that. So I was like, I'm just going to grab my sewing scissors, and they are very sharp, which means they cut through the hair, and I'm not like sawing at it with something less sharp. So we got that done. The other thing that saved my butt is I have been dealing with livestock first aid for many, many years, and I have consulted with my veterinarian on brands of clippers for cutting fur back. So I have a really good pair of sharp clippers. So I was able to cut his hair short first, and then take the clippers and in one pass cut the hair down to the scalp so I could see the wound. And then I felt around again to see if there was more outside of the area, the clear area that was where the blood had come from, and didn't feel anything. And then with him holding pressure on his head, because it was not bleeding, but it was like it did the ooze thing. I actually cut the rest of his hair off short so I could see what was up, and also because we needed to wash it. And then we went into the bathroom and washed with soap and mildly warm water to get all the blood off so I could see the rest of his scalp and see the wound area better. And once that was done, I put nonstick gauze on it, and then we wrapped him like it looked like he'd been in a car accident, but we wrapped him with whatever that stuff's called that I can't think of the name of right now. Is it gauze? Whatever, bandages, whatever. So like I went around so that it would hold the gauze on the wound. And at this point, it was sort of like, okay, we've chilled out. And then I went back and trimmed his hair a little bit more so he didn't look like a total freak. And we'll probably be clippering his hair the rest of the way at some point. But it was not the rolled gauze. Yeah. So it was rolled gauze. Thank you. I was like, I don't know. It's just the stuff I use. That's why I'm not the one teaching the class. So, then we had to decide if we were going to go to the ER and get stitches. We decided not to, even though he has 2.5-inch gashes. They're not super deep. And it's not somewhere where he is going to be cosmetically just like, it's up under his hair. It's not like anybody is going to be like, oh my goodness, you have a scar on the top of your head, man. Like, that's an ugly closure. So we then went to the next step. Was I wanted to put like steri strips or butterfly bandages or something like that to just kind of hold it together. It wasn't really gapping, but just, to hold it together. And I couldn't find any, and here's why. Tactical has reorganized his first aid stuff, and the way I have my first aid stuff organized, I don't know where they are. I'll just say it. I do not know where they are. What I'm doing the rest of this week is reorganizing how all of that stuff is arranged. And so since he wasn't critical, I went to the store and I bought all that stuff, and I came back because nobody in the holler has anything. Here's what we have. We have like Quick Clot, and we have all of the gauze, and we have all of the different kinds of gauze, and we have Band-Aids galore, and we have sticky tape to do wounds up with. But what we don't have are steri strips or butterfly closures or any of the things that you can do to just sort of close a wound. I could have stitched it. I had a stitching kit. I don't have lidocaine though, so that was going to be torture for him. So I went to the store and bought all of it. And the what I'm going to change about how, because I have like a human first aid kit that's like anything from flu meds to Motrin to Band-Aids to antibiotic cream to any of that stuff. It's all in one place. It's in this bin. It's the bin of things. You can treat poison ivy. You can get a Band-Aid. There's gauze in there. All of it. And I decided I need to change how that is organized, because the way I'm going to use it from a wound perspective, there are degrees of wounds, right? There is the Band-Aid antibacterial cream sterilizing pad set. And then the next step up is like pressure gauze, make a bandage wrap thing. And then the next step up are the steri strips and the butterfly things. And then the next step up is the quick clot and the tourniquets. So I'm going to just make one big giant, like, this is what the 4-step kit. And I'll have a few of those around. But that's what I basically needed. Now, as far as sterilizing the wound, I also didn't want to just put rubbing alcohol on it or hydrogen peroxide, because ouch, it already hurt. It was already clear that it hurt. And if that was the only thing I had, I would do that. But I had Benzidine, so that's what we used, because it is less stingy. And then, of course, we have the antibacterial cream, right? So I just tell you this story because first aid on the homestead can be unexpected. And often, like, you could be setting a leg, you could be dealing with cuts, burns, poison ivy, or other rashes, allergic reactions, which means you need Benadryl. And if it goes anaphylactic, like, then you need to get them somewhere. But Benadryl, like when I had my bee allergy, I was taking Benadryl on my way to get handled. And now I have an EpiPen. So, looking at what you have and how it can be packaged to be used is super helpful. And organization, I thought it was organized the way I needed it, because for 15 years it has been organized the way I needed it until today's head wound, and it was no longer organized the way I needed it. And that makes me realize, okay, I'll do this different. So somebody asked here if we have first aid stations at the holler. Yes, there are. There are first aid stations at the holler, and we have most of them centered around animal first aid, but that's actually not a problem. So most of the first aid I rendered today was from animal first aid station, because it was the fastest, it was the closest thing. And the same gauze that I use on animals is the same gauze I use on humans. I don't like buy different gauze for the two situations. The same Benzidine, it's like the same products. So I, in fact, walked up to the house, grabbed my animal first aid kit out, which is like right by where Tactical was standing, and was like, here's how, let's start, because that's what we got to do. I think from a homesteader perspective, there's some training that can be really, really helpful. Chuck says, tag! Yeah, animals and humans are very transferable. Exactly. There are some medicines that if you give animals will kill them. That's important to know. But basically, stop bleed classes are super helpful. And wound care is super helpful. And knowing the signs of a concussion is super helpful. And knowing what to do with anaphylactic shock is super helpful as a homesteader. And that can sound like an overwhelming list. But if you do one thing at a time, it's not that bad. And most of us have had to deal with cut fingers and other things of that nature. So it's also good to have ointments and medicines around, like the Benadryl, like comfrey salve is a really good one, like jewelweed salve, like a whole bunch of different things. The antibiotic cream, I really like that. So the thing we don't talk about much, though, from a homestead first aid standpoint is communications. Had I not had my phone with me, I would not have known that this had happened. And had we not had a protocol of how we communicate to each other in an urgent situation, it wouldn't have happened. Tactical said he hit his head and blood was everywhere. And it took him 4 tries to get the app up on his phone that he needed to do. And he said the first thing he did while holding it and blood pouring down was queue up to say what happened, so that if he passed out, somebody would know to come looking for him. And that was good. It would have been better if he would have told me where he was as part of that queue up. But I think something people don't always think about is when one of you is home and the other one's going out to do something in the far pasture, can you reach them if there's an emergency, or do they have to drag themselves home? I know somebody who went up into the woods and shot a deer and had a heart attack, dragged the deer home with him while having the heart attack, crawled up his stairs to tell his wife he was having a heart attack. How much better would it have been if he could have just called or used a radio made easy, to tell his wife, I'm having a heart attack and I need to get this done. So when you think about first aid, and Chuck says it right here, communications are just as important a piece of your kit as all of the other stuff I've mentioned. And that's something I don't think we always cover. But if you can't tell somebody you're hurt, then that's a huge issue. So it does turn out that the animal first aid kit that I had was way better organized for the scale of what happened at Tactical than any of my other first aid kits. But that all worked in our favor, I would say. So I would say, if you're going to prepare for these sorts of things, think about what wounds are most likely to happen on a homestead, what situations are more dangerous than others. And then if you can, take a Stop the Bleed class of one type or another. The Responder 1 course is really good from Bear Independent. Tactical Response has a Stop the Bleed class. I think it's Immediate Action Medical is what they had. I don't know if Chuck, if you do one of those. But the wound care class is super important. I mean, it's important to stop the bleed, but if you don't know how to keep somebody alive long term and keep them from getting an infection, then it doesn't matter that you stop the bleed if they die of an infection, right? So I think the advanced wound care class that Chuck is doing at Self-Reliance Festival is a must take if you want to be ready for these things, if you haven't taken that yet. I am super lucky that my dog got really, really hurt 2 years ago, and I had to take care of a horrific wound on my dog it was 4 months. 4 months of daily care twice a day for most of it, until the very end. I was able to do once a day, and I learned a lot about keeping a wound clean. And she did not die. And until that moment, I knew that you're supposed to keep them clean, but I didn't understand the full scale of like abrading the wound and all of that stuff that's required. And being somebody who doesn't like to watch people in pain, I might have wussed out on that, which would be to the detriment of whoever I was helping. Unfortunately for Tactical's head today, I was all in on like, we are not letting scabby blood like sit up there around the edges of your wound causing problems, right? So I'm not like picking his scab off itself, but I am keeping it very clean. And that means that he has to put his head over the bathtub and, get scrubbed from time to time. But an advanced wound care class is definitely worth your time investment and learning how to do that. Learning what to do if somebody's bitten by a snake in Tennessee is important, and other parts of the world. Like, how do you support that person until you can get them help? Or bee sting's gone wrong. That's my issue. Bee sting's gone wrong, or anaphylaxis from a nut allergy, or whatever that is. And then, of course, dealing with illness and how to deal with those sorts of things, as well as learning a few herbal remedies. All of that is really helpful. Chuck says, prolonged care is what you will be doing on the homestead with people and animals. Why you need the training. Debridement, cleaning, closure, or do you leave it open and wet to dry dressings? Exactly. And I will say, I'm not an expert on this. I just do the best I can and learn it as I go, right? So all of those things are important. And when we think about homesteading, it's like the homesteading we see on the internet looks a lot like cute baby goats and little baby chicks and garden abundance and all the canning. And it is all those things. It is all those things. But it is also a very physical lifestyle. Tag just got on here and talked about his slave driver. Tag works his butt off on his homestead. I think he's referring to his wife as the slave driver. I'm not sure. But you're outside, exposed to whatever can happen outside, as well as working with unpredictable livestock. And then, I mean, sometimes what you're doing is using a post hole driver over your head, and it cants off to one side and whacks you and causes you to bleed all over the place, which is what happened to Tactical today. He's actually lucky it didn't free fall into his head, because that would have been a much harder whack to the head, which would have caused a much bigger problem, or could have, because right now he's not showing any symptoms of a concussion. So that's good, right? But you're exposed to getting hurt. Now, you're exposed to getting hurt every day. And I would say anybody should learn advanced wound care, how to do basic first aid, how to stop bleeds, and what to do if somebody goes anaphylactic. Like, I think that would be just good general life things, but especially on the homestead. Chuck says the exact same thing happened to John Willis. I heard that. Tactical was like, that this happened to John once. And I was like, yeah, well, okay, but we need to shave your head now, dude. Anyway, so you end up being the one responsible when stuff happens. And if you know what to do, you're just in a much better place, because you've already taken those steps before, hypothetically, before you have to take steps to do it for the first time and think about what to do. I just think that preparing yourself for that can't hurt, and it will totally help. And I can't think of any homesteader who hasn't at least had something happen on their homestead where they had to brace an ankle or stop a bleed, or, like today I got to pull pieces of skin together with butterfly bandages. Super fun. These are all really important things to do. Before we wind up today, though, I want to take questions, and I have five stars. So K-Bonk says, I have cut butterflies, not hard to make. So K-Bonk has cut band-aids into the shape of butterflies to use in a pinch. Yep, you can do that. 30-day reviews asked how did he hurt himself. I have already answered that. Faith says children's liquid Benadryl is great to keep close for surprises, like surprise allergic reactions. My mom used to be sensitive to chemicals, and no one would give her an EpiPen, so they kept the Benadryl close by. Homestead walkie-talkie versus cell phone. I think this is a question from K-Bonk. We have radios, and they don't work great here. And I've been meaning to talk to Evan Dixon about that. The cell network has served us better on the homestead because we have better like cell connectivity than radio connectivity. That being said, the cell network's been like the thing that was lucky today is that my phone is only working 50% of the time here right now on our cell network. And it was working. I think I was on Wi-Fi, though, and that goes over Wi-Fi. So had that not been working, I would not have gotten the message. And Tactical sent it to me directly instead of the entire Holler. We have a Holler neighbor group on Zello. And so I've been meaning to talk to Evan about two things. One is about boosting the cell network. And the second is a different radio solution than the one we have, because I think because of the hilly nature of where we are here, the radios just aren't very they can't go very far. Like where Tactical was today, I wouldn't have heard from him on our radios. It's too far away, and it's about 0.2 of a mile away. So I would want something different for that. But I definitely do. We've been thinking more about what we're going to do about comms. And yeah, Tactical says radios don't work at all if you don't carry it. And then that's the other thing, is making sure that you have whatever communications device on you. I mean, I saw Chuck saying, do you carry anything but a tourniquet? Because like if you don't have the stuff on you, you can't stop you can't, like, you don't have gauze on you, you don't have gauze on you, right? And I can say I do not carry those things in my pockets. I have them in kits around in places here. Hey, Alabama says, are there YouTube videos to teach these things? Chuck, do you do YouTube videos to teach these things? Because I know I don't follow any particular stations that do that. I have learned all of my first aid from classes and from actual classes. That's just, and I mean, I've read some things about how to handle stuff as well. Anyway, those are my thoughts about Homestead First Aid. There is an opportunity to take a pretty darn cool class at the Self-Reliance Festival from Chuck Peoples, who has been in here. He's a great teacher for that. And it's at selfreliancefestival.com. Just click on tickets and you'll see Homestead Advanced Wound Care. And he's going to talk about how to keep somebody alive over time who has a wound that's got to be taken care of. So that's a pretty cool thing. Guys, if you like the show and want to support the work I'm doing here, you can do it in two ways. One, get your coffee at hollowroast.com. Two, consider becoming a member. All of that information is at livingfreeintennessee.com. Bear Independent has a video series on basic bleed stopping trauma type care. So that's pretty cool too. And Hey Alabama says, what do you charge for those classes? Chuck does charge for his classes. So that is an extra charge over at selfreliancefestival.com. Hey guys, I appreciate you dropping in and having this conversation with me about wound care. We had a pretty exciting day. That's why I'm recording this at 5:42 p.m. We got through the sort of the height of it, and then I had some cleanup to do related to somebody getting blood everywhere. And I made a decision that it had, it took a while to do that. And while I was in town, I hit the deli and I got cold cuts and I made a charcuterie platter. I was like, okay, my whole day is behind anyway. We're going to have charcuterie so we're not starving. And I'm going to have a cup of coffee and reset my mind. And then I'm going to go write the show notes for the meat curing show I was going to do today. And then I was like, well, hey, why not just talk about what actually happened on the homestead today? That might be a better shot, right? So that's what we did. And it all worked out fine. Tactical's actually going to the doctor tomorrow for a different reason. So I'm sure we'll get to see what they decide to do with his head tomorrow. But for right now, he's doing well. As I said, no concussion. And I appreciate you jumping in and sharing your thoughts as we went forward. Make it a great week.